Welcome back to Crumpled Stuff, my workshop series focusing on cardboard, paper mache, and other simple found materials. Today we're going to be going over paper mache, how to make it, how to use it, and why I think it's cool. There's a lot of different styles and recipes for making paper mache. My preferred method is cornstarch. That's all you need, cornstarch and water. When you're buying your cornstarch, this is the brand I like. It's the easiest to find and it's the cheapest. You want the cheapest cornstarch not only because it's cheap, but because the cheaper stuff has nothing else in it. I've seen fancier cornstarches that have like whatever added to it, but this stuff, you can see it says ingredient, singular, cornstarch. That's all we want, cornstarch. Okay, so let's get started. First, let's assemble our materials. You're not going to need any fancy supplies to make paper mache, just fancy techniques. So like I mentioned, we're going to start with cornstarch. We have 1 cup of that. We're also going to need water, both boiling water and lukewarm water. And then we're going to need paper to make the paper part of the mache. I prefer brown paper grocery bags. If you don't have any of these on hand anymore because you've switched to reusable bags like we all should, then any kind of heavy paper will work great. If you have butcher paper, craft paper, that's ideal. But if you don't have any heavier craft paper like that, you can use printer paper, you can use newspaper. I personally don't love newspaper. I find it to be too thin, but it's all about being resourceful. So whatever you have, we can always make it work. Okay, that's our paper. And then we're gonna need a nice sized mixing bowl, something to mix with. I have my cool bent up fork that I like. You're gonna need a tray to take the paper mache and put onto as you're working. And then you're gonna need an object to apply your paper mache onto. If you watched my previous video, I went over how to make this cardboard vessel. Since that video, I built it out a little bit, added some more shape here, added a top, put these arms on. I also put some weight in the bottom. I added a second cap of plastic on the bottom and put some screws inside to weigh it down. So now it's a little bit more stable. Optional. If you didn't build anything out of cardboard, paper mache can be attached to almost anything. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so let's start making the goop. Take 1 cup of cornstarch and put it in your mixing bowl. Add to that 1 cup of lukewarm water. You don't want this water to be hot because that will activate the starch too early. You don't want it to be too cold because then the starch will not want to activate at all. So you want it to be just right. So now we're going to go and mix the starch and water until it's this thin slurry. Okay, that looks good. Now this part is very important. We're gonna add 1 quart of boiling water, about 4 cups, to this slurry. As we pour, we're gonna whisk continuously. When that happens, it's gonna activate all the starch and turn it into this thick, beautiful, glossy gel. That's our goop. The technique is really important in this because it's really easy to not have the chemical reaction happen where it turns into that gel. It's happened to me many times. So the key is that you want your water to be really boiling, a full rolling boil, and you want to pour the water as fast as you can. I've made the mistake before of doing a slow stream, but you want to really dump the boiling water while you're doing this as quickly as you can. All right, here we go. So I've got my nice, robust boil really cooking. So I'm gonna, again, continuously whisk. I'm gonna take my boiling water, I'm gonna pour it in. And just like that, we have this beautiful, glossy goop. Oh yeah. I really honestly think that fresh paper mache goop is just one of the most beautiful things. Look at that. Oh baby. Mama. Okay. So this is our goop. Now, this is gonna be boiling hot. So if you wanted to, you can thin it out a little bit by adding cold water. You can also put it in the fridge, you can put it aside, let it cool for a little while. As my goop cools and gets to a more comfortable temperature for my little hands, I'm gonna show you how to fillet a brown paper bag. So when we're making our mache, what we're doing is we're getting rid of all the machined edges. First, we're gonna take off the handles. Okay, now open it up, and we're gonna remove the spine, which is this seam that runs down the paper bag. If you take 2 fingers and kind of hold it in place, you can remove just that piece. Now we're gonna remove this foot going along this folded edge. So now we have our fillet, and then we're going to take this top machined edge and we're going to take that off. So the reason why you want to take off the machined edge is that this rougher edge now has all these soft layers to it, and as we make our goop and our mache, these soft fluffy layers will merge together much better and make a nice smooth surface. This machined edge will never really go away. It won't attach as well, it'll kind of flap up, and it just won't work very well. So you want to remove that edge. So now you have a sheet with no machined edges. Make a bunch of squares that are roughly hand size. My goop has now cooled to a pretty comfortable temperature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sheets of paper, I'm going to scoop a little goop, I'm going to cover both sides thoroughly with the goop. Look at how luxurious and glossy it gets. It's very soothing to assemble your papier-mâché. So don't leave any dry bits, and get it nice and covered. So this is about the amount of coverage you want. You don't want it sopped, but you want it pretty good. So then we're gonna wad it up into this loose ball. You can see it's not so tight that I squeezed it, but it's pretty well together. I'll put that ball on the tray. Now I'm gonna go through all my paper. I'm gonna make all these balls, and I'm gonna sit this one here and let it cook. Let it melt and congeal. And by the time I finish a section of balls, the first ones are pretty much ready to use. Now there's the question of what are we going to apply our paper mache to? As I said previously, I'm going to use this cardboard vessel I made in the last video, but you don't have to do that. Paper mache will stick to all kinds of stuff. Whatever you have lying around, you can make into a paper mache sculpture. Blue foam is something that I use a lot to carve with. It sticks great to paper mache. If you're a clay person, clay and paper mache go great together. What I would do if you're going to use clay is wrap the clay in cellophane wrap, something that the paper mache won't stick to, because clay will kind of melt into the paper mache. You can use wire, you can use, found objects, stick them together, cover them in paper mache. What I love about working with paper mache is that it unifies the surface. So, the bottom of this was plastic bottle, the side is cardboard, but now it makes it much more cohesive. So if I wanted to cover this in paint, I could. If I wanted to take an object just as is, not change it, I could paper mache this jar, and then it becomes a great surface to paint designs onto, whatever you want. All right, I think my wads are pretty well cooked. You don't want to wait too long because the sheet will break down to the point where it's no longer a sheet, and the structural integrity of the paper becomes more difficult, but this is a nice amount of melt. So what I'm going to do is take a little bit of goop, I'm going to apply it directly to my object. What's nice about working with cardboard specifically is that it like the paper, absorbs the mache. The cardboard will get more rigid from the mache in the same way that the paper will on top of it. I think they become really nice together. So I'm going to cover my guy in goop. You want to be careful to just get it wet. You don't want it so thick that the goop can't dry under it, because you can definitely have a piece that seems as though it's dry, but there will still be some gunk under the surface that will sometimes never quite dry. All right, so for now, I just gunked up this one section. If I do the whole thing, it might start to dry before I get it done. So I'm just gonna do this part for now. I'm gonna take my sheet, I'm gonna rip small sections from it. Because if I take the whole sheet and I apply it here, I'm gonna lose all of that detail. So what I wanna do is just take my little piece and apply it in a way where it's nice and smooth. And when there's a crack or a seam, you can take a fingernail or a little, tool or a spoon or a ruler you have. If you want to, you can work it in the cracks or not. Now, one more thing to think about is that if you're doing a thinner paper, like newspaper or computer paper or a magazine or whatever paper you decide to use, if it's not as thick as this brown paper or craft paper, I would probably skip the wadded up ball method and just take a sheet of paper, rip the machine edges off, apply the goop to it, both sides again, and stick it right onto the object. I would experiment. If you find that your paper is too thin, keep playing with it until you get the effect that you want. Now, as I finish up this first layer, something to think about is how many layers you're going to apply to your object. I mean, there's a few different rule of thumbs you can think about. You want to remember that this is essentially a sheet of paper with some glue on it. So every layer is like a sheet and a half of paper. So, for this case, this is not something that needs to be structurally sound. It already has the cardboard underneath. For most of it, I think one layer will be fine. I have these ridges here. Let's say I want to really preserve a little bit of that hard edge. One layer will be fine, because if I do 3 or 4 layers, it's going to soften up a lot and you'll lose that crispness. Maybe you want that. If you put on 4 or 5 layers, it's going to these indentations will get much more subtle. But even still, like this connection point here, I would probably do at least 2 or 3 layers, even on this simple object, on that connection point. If this was a load-bearing object, like if you were making a puppet or a costume or something that was getting a lot of action, I would plan on, at least 3 layers. Because really, if you take care of this stuff, don't get it wet, it can last indefinitely. So if you imagine the life of the object in the future, maybe you'll be careful with it, but who knows who will yank on it and what the stress point will be. So I would really plan on this being a permanent object that, could last forever. I've now flipped my object upside down so that I can get the underside. Flipping it around like this also gives you a new perspective to see any areas that might not look right or that you couldn't quite see. All right, and my object is now fully covered in paper mache. I'm gonna let it dry I set up this piece of wood on a clamp here, and I'm gonna hang it upside down. So this way, nothing that's wet will be touching the ground. If you don't have a situation where you can hang it upside down like this, you can apply the paper mache in 2 sections. So do the top half, let that dry, flip it, do the bottom half. What to do with the rest of your goop? If you have leftover goop, you can save it. It will keep indefinitely. Just grab a sheet of cellophane, and you would just make sure that it comes in contact with the goop so there's not any air touching it, and this will keep in the fridge indefinitely. If you don't want to keep it, if you have had enough goop, you can just pour it down the drain. You know, whatever. It's totally water soluble, non-toxic. Today has become tomorrow, and my vessel is now fully dried. Or I should say it's 98% dry. There's still a few little spots that are kind of wet. I would probably let it get 100% dry before I painted it or did anything else to it. But at this point you can handle it and not really worry about messing it up. Drying time really varies with paper mache depending on the environment that it's in. If it's a hot summer day in the sun, your paper mache can dry in an hour, 2 hours. But you know, it's still a pretty dreary spring here in New York, so it took overnight and it's still not 100% cured. But this could be a finished object if I wanted to. I could add paint to it. I like using house paint because that makes it a little bit waterproof. You could add flocking to it, you could put feathers on it, you could put rhinestones on it. This can be a foundation for more building, or this can be the finished object. If you wanted to, you could go through and sand off rough spots and little folds, and then do spot touch-ups to make it more perfectly smooth. You could cover it in plaster. Really, anything that you want to do, you can do with paper mache. That's it for today. Thank you for watching and or participating in this workshop. If you got anything out of it, feel free to kick me a few bucks at Venmo. I'm at Nick DeMarco. Don't feel obligated to, it's hard times for all of us. But if you do make anything from the workshop, please do send it over to me. A bunch of people sent me stuff they made from episode 1, and it warmed my little heart. I'm gonna post the recipe for the goop in the comments, so you can look at that. And if you have any requests for future classes, also hit me up. Thank you, bye.